Caleb Thornton dropped to his knees in the blood-stained snow, his hands trembling as he reached for the woman's frozen fingers. She wasn't moving. Behind her, a child no older than 6 stood guard with a broken shovel, her small body shaking, but her eyes burning with something fiercer than fear.
"Don't you touch her,"
the girl whispered.
"I'll kill you if you touch her."
In that moment, Caleb knew. Walking away meant death for them both. Staying meant facing everything he'd spent 9 years running from. If stories of sacrifice, second chances, and love born from ashes speak to your heart, stay with me until the very end. Hit subscribe and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The blizzard had been howling for 3 days straight when Caleb Thornton found them. He'd ridden out to check on his cattle, knowing full well he might not make it back. 9 years alone on this Montana ranch had taught him that the land didn't care whether a man lived or died. It just kept on being what it was, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. His horse, a gray mare named Smoke, had been fighting the wind for nearly an hour when she suddenly stopped, refused to move forward. "Come on, girl." Caleb pressed his heels against her flanks. "Ain't got time for this." Smoke snorted and tossed her head toward the old Miller cabin. The place had been abandoned for years, ever since the Miller family packed up and headed back east after losing 2 children to the fever. Caleb squinted through the swirling white. Something was different. Smoke rising from the chimney, thin and weak, but definitely there. "What in the—" He urged Smoke forward, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle at his side. Drifters sometimes used empty cabins. Most were harmless. Some weren't. The door was hanging open, snow piling up on the threshold. That was wrong. Nobody in their right mind would leave a door open in this cold. Caleb dismounted and drew his rifle. He'd survived the war, survived losing Clara and Rose, survived 9 winters alone. He wasn't about to die because some fool got the drop on him in an abandoned cabin. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone in there?" No answer, just the wind. He stepped inside and his heart stopped. A man lay on the floor near the fireplace, his body stiff and blue. Dead at least 2 days, maybe 3. Beside him, a woman was slumped against the wall, her arm wrapped around a small child. The woman's face was pale as milk, her breathing so shallow, Caleb had to watch for a full minute to be sure she was alive at all. But it was the child who held his attention. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her dark hair was matted with something that might have been blood, and her dress was torn and filthy. But her eyes, Lord, her eyes, were fixed on Caleb with a fury that seemed too big for such a small body. She was holding a broken shovel like a weapon, positioning herself between Caleb and her mother.
"Don't you touch her!"
The girl's voice cracked, but she didn't waver.
"I'll kill you if you touch her!"
Caleb slowly lowered his rifle, his chest tightening in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Easy now." He kept his voice soft, the way he talked to spooked horses. "I ain't here to hurt nobody."
"That's what the other men said."
The girl's grip tightened on the shovel.
"Before they took everything. Before they hurt Mama. Before they—"
Her voice broke, but she swallowed hard and lifted her chin.
"Papa tried to stop them. They shot him."
Caleb's jaw clenched. He looked at the dead man on the floor with new understanding. Not sickness then. Murder. How long ago?
3 days, maybe 4.
The girl's arms were shaking now, the shovel dipping despite her best efforts.
"I've been keeping the fire going. Mama told me to keep the fire going."
"You did good." Caleb took a careful step forward. "You did real good. But your mama needs help now. The kind I can give her, if you let me. Why should I trust you?" The question hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. Because she shouldn't. Because trust got people killed. Because he'd stopped trusting anyone the day he buried his wife and daughter in the same grave. "You shouldn't," he said, honestly. "But I reckon you ain't got much choice. Your mama's dying. I can see it from here. You can keep holding that shovel and watch it happen, or you can let me try to help." The girl studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because the shovel slowly lowered. "Her name's Maggie," the girl whispered. "Margaret Brennan. I'm Molly." Caleb Thornton. He crossed to where Maggie lay and knelt beside her.
"I've got a ranch about 5 miles west. We need to get her there."
"She won't wake up." Molly's voice trembled. "I tried. I keep trying."
Caleb pressed his hand to Maggie's forehead. Burning with fever, he pulled back her coat and found the wound, a deep gash across her shoulder, crudely wrapped with strips of petticoat, the flesh around it angry and red. Infection. Maybe blood poisoning. Out here, either one was a death sentence. "We need to move her now," Caleb said. "Can you ride?" Molly nodded, her small face set with determination.
"Papa was teaching me."
"Good girl." Caleb gathered Maggie into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones and fever. "Stay close to me. Don't let go of my belt for anything." They stepped out into the storm, and the wind hit them like a wall of ice. Caleb hunched over Maggie, trying to shield her from the worst of it. Molly grabbed onto his belt with both hands, her small fingers digging in like she'd never let go. The ride back to the ranch was the longest 5 miles of Caleb's life. Smoke plowed through the drifts with the kind of stubborn determination that had made Caleb choose her 9 years ago. Maggie's head lolled against his chest, her breathing growing more ragged with each passing minute. And Molly, tiny, fierce Molly, clung to his belt without a single complaint, even when the cold must have been cutting through her thin clothes like knives. By the time the ranch house came into view, Caleb's arms were numb and his heart was pounding with something that felt dangerously like fear. He kicked open the front door and carried Maggie inside, laying her on his bed, the only real bed in the place. Molly followed so close she was practically stepping on his heels. "I need hot water," Caleb said, already stripping away the bloody bandages. "There's a pump in the kitchen. Can you work it?" Molly ran without answering. Caleb worked fast, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Maggie's unconscious body jerk. He packed it with the same poultice he used on his horses, yarrow and comfrey and hope. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Molly appeared with a bucket of water, sloshing half of it on the floor in her haste. Her face was pale, her lips almost blue. "Is she going to die?" Caleb wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine, that her mama would wake up and everything would go back to normal. But he'd made a promise to himself after Clara died. No more lies, not even kind ones. "I don't know," he said. "She's fighting. That's all we can ask for right now." Molly's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, small and straight, like a soldier waiting for orders. "What do you need me to do?" Caleb felt something crack inside him, something he'd kept frozen for 9 long years. "Keep bringing water," he said, "and talk to her. Sometimes people can hear, even when they're sleeping like this. Let her know you're here." Molly nodded and knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's hand in both of hers. "Mama, it's me. It's Molly." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The nice man brought us somewhere warm. You need to wake up now, okay? You promised you'd never leave me. You promised." Caleb turned away, his throat tight. He busied himself with the fire, building it up until the small cabin was almost too warm. Then he made coffee, strong and black, and forced Molly to eat some dried venison, even though she said she wasn't hungry. The night stretched on, endless and uncertain. Caleb sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Maggie's chest rise and fall. Molly had finally fallen asleep on the floor, curled up in a blanket with her head resting against the bed frame. Even in sleep, her hand was still wrapped around her mother's fingers. Sometime around midnight, Maggie's fever broke. Caleb felt it happen, the sudden cool of her skin under his palm, the easing of her breathing. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank God," he muttered. Maggie's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she just stared at the ceiling, confusion clouding her features. Then her head turned, taking in the unfamiliar room, and panic flared across her face. "Molly!" "She's here." Caleb moved into her line of sight, keeping his voice low. "Right beside you. She's safe. You're both safe." Maggie's gaze found her daughter, and something in her expression crumpled. Her hand moved to touch Molly's hair, gentle despite her weakness. "Where?" Her voice was barely a rasp. "Where are we?" "My ranch, about 5 miles west of where I found you." Caleb handed her a cup of water. "Small sips. You've been out for a while." Maggie drank, her eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she asked the question he'd been dreading.
"Patrick? My husband?"
Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." Maggie closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't sob, didn't wail. Just lay there, silent and still, processing a grief too big for words. "I knew," she whispered finally. "I knew when I woke up and he wasn't beside me. I didn't want to believe it." "The men who did this, do you know who they were?" "Drifters. 3 of them." Maggie's voice hardened. "They wanted money. We didn't have any. Patrick tried to fight them off." Her breath hitched. "He was never much of a fighter. He was a carpenter. He made beautiful things with his hands. He made Molly's doll." Caleb noticed the ragged cloth doll clutched in Molly's sleeping grip. His chest ached. "I'm sorry," he said again, because there was nothing else to say. "Why did you help us?" Maggie's eyes opened, fixing on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You don't know us. You could have just ridden past." "No," Caleb shook his head. "I couldn't have." "Why not?" "Because I've been dead inside for 9 years, and something about your daughter's fierce little face made me remember what it felt like to care. Because I buried my own wife and child, and the thought of leaving you to the same fate made me want to put a bullet in my own head. Because I'm tired of being alone, and I didn't know it until I saw you lying there in the snow." But he didn't say any of that. He just said, "Because it was the right thing to do." Maggie studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she laughed. It was a weak, broken sound, but it was still laughter. "My mother always said no one does anything without expecting something in return." "Your mother sounds like a hard woman." "She is." Maggie's expression shuddered. "She's also the reason we were heading west, away from her, away from everything she wanted to control." Caleb didn't push. Everyone had things they were running from. He knew that better than most. "You should rest," he said. "We can talk more in the morning." "Mr. Thornton," he paused at the door. "Thank you." Maggie's voice was barely audible. "For saving us. For saving her." Caleb nodded once and stepped outside into the cold. The storm had finally passed. Stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, vast and indifferent. Caleb stood on the porch for a long time, letting the freezing air bite into his skin. He'd been alone by choice for 9 years, built walls around himself so high he'd forgotten what the other side looked like. But tonight, a woman and her child were sleeping in his house, and something inside him had shifted. Something dangerous. Something that felt almost like hope. He didn't sleep that night, just sat on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Morning came cold and clear. Caleb was splitting wood when Molly appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket that dragged on the ground behind her.
Mr. Thornton?
Just Caleb. He set down the axe.
Mr. Thornton was my father.
Molly considered this.
Caleb,
she said, testing the word.
Mama's asking for you.
He found Maggie sitting up in bed, pale but alert. Her dark hair was tangled around her face, and there were deep shadows under her eyes. But she looked stronger than she had any right to be after what she'd been through. Mrs. Brennan.
Maggie.
She almost smiled.
If I'm calling you Caleb, it's only fair.
He nodded, standing awkward and uncertain in his own bedroom. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had been in here. 9 years at least. Clara had never even seen this house. Molly says you stayed up all night watching over us.
Somebody had to.
You could have slept.
I don't sleep much.
Caleb shrugged. Haven't for years. Maggie's eyes softened with something that might have been understanding.
The war?
That, and other things. She didn't press. Instead, she said, I've been thinking about what happens next. Molly and we can't stay here. It wouldn't be proper. There's got to be a town nearby, somewhere we can... You're in no condition to travel. Caleb's voice came out sharper than he intended. That wound needs at least a week to heal proper. Maybe 2. I can't impose on you for 2 weeks. You can't walk 10 feet without falling over either. He crossed his arms. Look, I ain't offering charity. You and the girl can work while you're here. Cook, clean, whatever needs doing. Call it fair trade for room and board until you're well enough to leave. Maggie's chin lifted. I don't need your pity. Good, because I ain't offering any. Caleb met her stubborn gaze with one of his own. I'm offering a practical arrangement. You need time to heal and figure out where you're going. I need someone to cook meals that don't taste like leather. Seems like we can help each other. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. 2 stubborn people, too proud to admit they needed anything from anyone. Molly broke the standoff.
Mama,
she tugged on her mother's sleeve.
I'm hungry.
Maggie's expression softened. She looked at her daughter, then back at Caleb, and something in her shoulders relaxed.
2 weeks, she said. Then we're gone.
2 weeks, Caleb agreed. He didn't know it then, standing in that small room with winter light streaming through the window. But those 2 weeks would change everything. 2 weeks would turn into a month. A month would turn into forever. And the walls he'd spent 9 years building would come crashing down around him, stone by stone, until there was nothing left but the truth he'd been running from all along. He wasn't meant to be alone. He never had been. The first week passed in a rhythm Caleb hadn't known in 9 years. Maggie was true to her word about working. Despite her wound, she insisted on cooking every meal, cleaning the small cabin until it barely recognized itself, and mending clothes Caleb had given up on years ago. She moved through his space like she belonged there, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. You're going to tear those stitches, Caleb said on the 4th morning, watching her struggle to lift a cast-iron pot. Maggie shot him a look that could have frozen whiskey. I'm fine. You're stubborn is what you are. Takes one to know one. Molly giggled from her spot by the fireplace, where she was attempting to brush one of the barn cats. The sound made both adults freeze. It was the first time the girl had laughed since Caleb found them, Maggie's eyes filled with tears. She turned away quickly, but not before Caleb saw. Here. He crossed the room and took the pot from her hands.
Sit down before you fall down. I told you I'm Maggie. His voice was quiet, but firm. Please.
Something in his tone made her stop fighting. She sank into the chair by the table, her good hand pressed against her wounded shoulder.
I hate feeling useless, she whispered.
You ain't useless. You're healing. Caleb set the pot on the stove. There's a difference.
Is there?
He turned to look at her. Really look. The bruises on her face were fading from purple to yellow-green. Her color was better than it had been. But there was something in her eyes, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. What happened to you? The question came out before he could stop it. Before the drifters, I mean. What were you running from? Maggie's expression shuddered. That's not your concern. Reckon it is, if it's going to follow you here. It won't. How do you know? Because... Maggie stopped. Her jaw tightened.
Because the person I'm running from doesn't know where I am.
And even if she did, she'd never lower herself to come to a place like this. She... Maggie's laugh was bitter. My mother, Harriet Whitfield of Philadelphia. Perhaps you've heard of the Whitfield textile fortune? Caleb shook his head. No, I suppose you wouldn't have. Maggie's fingers twisted in her lap. My mother is one of the wealthiest women on the East Coast. She controls everything. The business, the family, everyone around her. When I was 18, she arranged a marriage for me. A man 30 years my senior. He owned railroads. And you said no. I said no. And then I ran. Maggie's voice dropped. Patrick was a carpenter who did work on our house. He had nothing but his hands and his heart. My mother said I was throwing my life away. Said I'd come crawling back within the year. Did you? No. Maggie lifted her chin. We had 8 good years. 8 years of being poor and happy and free.
Then Patrick heard about land opportunities in Montana. A fresh start, he said. A place where Molly could grow up without the shadow of my mother's money hanging over her.
Caleb understood now. The careful way Maggie spoke, the education evident in her words, the refinement she couldn't quite hide even in a rough cabin in the middle of nowhere. Your mother doesn't know you're out here? No one knows. Patrick and I told everyone we were heading to California. Maggie's eyes met his. I need to keep it that way, Caleb. If my mother finds out where I am, she'll... She'll what? She'll try to take Molly. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Take her how? Through the courts, through lawyers, through whatever means necessary. Maggie's voice shook. My mother believes money can buy anything, and in her experience it usually can. She'll say I'm an unfit mother. She'll say I abandoned my family, made reckless choices, can't provide for my daughter. And now... Her voice broke. Now Patrick's dead, and I have nothing. No money, no home, no husband. My mother will use all of it against me. She'd do that to her own daughter? You don't know her. Maggie wiped at her eyes angrily. She doesn't see people. She sees possessions, things to control. When I left, I stopped being her daughter and became her enemy. Molly had stopped brushing the cat. She was watching her mother with wide, frightened eyes. Mama, is the mean lady going to find us? Maggie forced a smile. No, sweetheart. We're safe here. But Caleb saw the fear she was hiding, the certainty that nowhere was truly safe. Molly, he kept his voice casual. You ever collected eggs from a chicken coop? The girl shook her head. Well, I got about a dozen hens out in the barn who are mighty tired of me being the only one visiting them.
You want to come help? Molly looked at her mother. Maggie nodded, her smile a little more genuine now.
Go on. I'll rest, like Mr. Caleb wants me to. Just Caleb, Mama. Molly was already reaching for her coat. He told me yesterday. The girl slipped her small hand into Caleb's, and something cracked open inside him that he'd thought was sealed forever. Out in the barn, Molly approached the chickens with the same fierce determination she'd shown while guarding her mother with a shovel. She didn't flinch when the hens flapped and squawked, just set her jaw and reached under them for the eggs. "You're a natural," Caleb said. "Papa said I was brave." Molly placed an egg carefully in the basket. "He said I was the bravest girl he ever knew." "Sounds like your papa was a smart man." "He was." Molly's lower lip trembled. "I miss him." Caleb knelt down so he was at her level. "I lost someone too. My wife and my little girl. A long time ago." Molly's eyes widened. You had a little girl?
"Rose. She was about your age when she died."
What happened to her?
"She got sick. Her mama too. I couldn't save them." Caleb's throat tightened. It had been 9 years, but saying the words still felt like swallowing broken glass. "I wanted to. I tried everything I could think of. But sometimes wanting something isn't enough." Molly was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and patted his hand with her small fingers. "I'm sorry about your little girl." "I'm sorry about your papa." They stayed like that, two broken people finding an unexpected moment of understanding in a cold barn surrounded by chickens.
Caleb?
Molly's voice was small.
Is Mama going to die too?
No. He said it with more certainty than he felt. Your mama's too stubborn to die. Molly almost smiled.
She is stubborn. Papa always said so.
Takes a stubborn woman to walk away from a fortune.
What's a fortune?
A lot of money. More money than you can imagine.
Molly considered this.
We never have a lot of money. But Mama said we had enough. She said enough was better than too much, because too much makes people mean.
Caleb thought about that. Thought about Harriet Whitfield, who had so much money she couldn't see her own daughter as anything but property. Thought about his own empty years, rich in nothing but solitude and regret. Your mama's a wise woman. They finished collecting eggs and headed back to the cabin. Maggie was standing at the window, watching for them. The relief on her face when she saw Molly was so raw, so naked, that Caleb had to look away. That night, after Molly fell asleep in the loft, Maggie found Caleb on the porch.
You told her about your family.
It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer. She told me. Maggie wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders.
About Rose and your wife.
Shouldn't have burdened her with that.
You didn't burden her. You made her feel less alone.
Maggie sat down beside him, leaving a careful distance between them.
That's a gift, Caleb. Don't you know that?
He stared at the stars, unable to meet her eyes. It's been 9 years, and I still don't know how to talk about them. Then a 6-year-old asks me a question, and suddenly, I'm telling her things I've never told anyone. Children have a way of getting past our defenses. Molly's special. She is. Maggie's voice softened. She's the best thing I ever did. The only thing that matters. Caleb finally looked at her. The moonlight turned her pale skin silver and caught the tears glistening in her eyes. Your mother won't get her. I won't let that happen. Maggie laughed, but it came out wrong. You don't even know us. We've been here less than a week. Why would you? Because someone should have protected Clara and Rose, and I couldn't. The words tore out of him. Because every night for 9 years, I've gone to sleep in an empty house, hating myself for surviving when they didn't. Because when I saw Molly standing in that cabin with a broken shovel, ready to fight the world to save you, I saw something worth protecting. Maggie was staring at him, her lips parted.
Caleb.
I ain't asking for anything. He stood abruptly, suddenly aware of how close they were. I'm just telling you how it is. You and Molly are safe here. As long as you want to stay, you're safe. He went back inside before she could respond. That night, lying in his bedroll in the barn, Caleb cursed himself for a fool. He'd spent 9 years building walls, and in less than a week, a widow and her daughter had torn them down like they were made of paper. The second week brought a thaw. Not in the weather, winter still had Montana in its grip, but in the careful distance between Caleb and Maggie. She stopped flinching when he handed her things.
He stopped leaving the room whenever she entered it. They fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings, Caleb did chores while Maggie made breakfast. Afternoons, while Maggie rested, Caleb taught Molly to read from the only book he owned, a battered copy of McGuffey's Reader that had belonged to his sister.
"Why is there a K in knife if nobody says it?" Molly demanded on the 10th day. "Because English is peculiar." "That's stupid." "Can't argue with that." Maggie laughed from her chair by the fire, and Caleb's heart did something strange in his chest. "Your sister's book?" Maggie asked later, when Molly had gone to feed the chickens. "Mary. She was 5 years older than me. Taught me to read with this same book." "Where is she now?" "Dead. Typhoid, when I was 16. Maggie's hand touched his arm. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago."
Does it stop hurting with time? Caleb thought about Clara's laugh, Rose's gap-toothed smile, the way they'd looked lying in their beds with fever burning them up from the inside.
"No," he said honestly. "You just learn to carry it different." That afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Caleb saw him first. He was outside repairing a section of fence when the figure crested the hill, silhouetted against the gray sky. His hand went to his rifle instinctively. "Maggie," he kept his voice calm. "Take Molly inside." "What is it?" "Probably nothing. Just do it." Something in his tone made her obey without argument. She gathered Molly and disappeared into the cabin. Through the window, Caleb could see her watching. The rider approached slowly. As he got closer, Caleb relaxed slightly. He knew that horse, knew that easy posture. "Sheriff Wade," Caleb lowered the rifle. "Long way from town." Thomas Wade dismounted and walked toward him. The sheriff was a big man, weathered by years of frontier law enforcement, with a silver star pinned to his coat and tired eyes that had seen too much. "Caleb," Wade tipped his hat. "Heard you got visitors." "News travels fast." "It does when a man who hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years suddenly shows up at Doc Henley's asking about medicines for fever and infection." Caleb's jaw tightened. He should have known. "They're not trouble." "Didn't say they were." Wade's eyes drifted to the cabin. "But there's a man at the saloon asking questions. Well-dressed fellow from back east. Says he's looking for a woman and child. Widow of a carpenter named Patrick Brennan." Caleb's blood went cold. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Told him I didn't know anything about any widow." Wade's gaze was steady. "But Caleb, he's got money. He's been buying drinks, asking around. It's only a matter of time before someone talks." "Who is he?" "Says his name is Cornelius Price. Claimed to be a lawyer representing the woman's family. Says he just wants to help them get home safe." "That's a lie." "Figured as much." Wade scratched his jaw. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" Caleb hesitated. He'd known Thomas Wade for years. They'd served together in the war, though they didn't talk about that. Wade was a good man, honest as they came in a territory where honesty was rare. "The woman's mother wants to take her daughter, the child. She's got money and lawyers, and she'll do whatever it takes." "That's a family matter, Caleb. Law can't get involved in—" "Law can't or won't." Wade's expression hardened. "Careful. Her husband was murdered. 3 drifters shot him in cold blood and left his wife and child to die. You want to talk about the law? Start there. Something flickered in Wade's eyes. You know who did it? No, but I know they were heading south when they left, probably in Wyoming territory by now. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. I'll look into it. Can't promise anything, but I'll look. He mounted his horse. And Caleb? That lawyer, Price. He's not going to stop asking questions. If you're thinking about keeping these folks hidden, you better think harder. What would you do? Wade looked at him. Really looked. Same thing you're doing, I reckon. But I'm not the one who has to live with the consequences. He rode away, leaving Caleb standing in the cold with a decision he wasn't ready to make. Inside, Maggie was waiting. Her face was pale, her good hand clenched at her side. He found us. Not yet. There's a lawyer in town asking questions. Your mother sent him. Maggie sank into a chair. Cornelius Price, my mother's man. He's been with her for years. He's relentless. Then we need to be more relentless. You don't understand. Maggie's voice was hollow. Price doesn't just ask questions. He finds things, uses them. If there's any weakness, any flaw, anything that can be twisted against you, he'll find it. He'll destroy you. Let him try. Caleb, you don't know what you're dealing with. I know I've got a woman and child under my roof who need protecting. That's enough. Maggie looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Really? And don't tell me it's the right thing to do. Nobody risks this much for strangers. Caleb wanted to tell her the truth. That somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she and Molly had stopped being strangers. That he woke up every morning thinking about them. That the thought of them leaving made his chest hurt in ways he didn't understand. Instead, he said, Maybe I'm just a fool. Maybe you are. But she was almost smiling. What do we do now? Now? Caleb grabbed his coat. Now I go into town and meet this lawyer. Caleb, no! He's looking for a widow and child. He's not looking for a rancher who lives alone.
I'll find out what he knows, how close he is. Then we figure out our next move. Maggie caught his arm as he passed. Be careful. Price is dangerous. So am I. Something passed between them. An understanding. A promise. Then Caleb walked out into the cold, toward a battle he hadn't asked for, but couldn't walk away from. The ride into Elk Creek took 2 hours. Caleb used the time to think. Cornelius Price, a lawyer from Philadelphia with money to spend and questions to ask. Sent by Harriet Whitfield, a woman who saw her own daughter as property to be controlled. And in the middle of it all, a 6-year-old girl with fierce eyes and a cloth doll made by her murdered father. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. He'd failed Clara and Rose, failed to protect them when it mattered most. But Molly and Maggie were still alive, still fighting, and he'd be damned if he let some fancy lawyer from back east take that away. Elk Creek was busy for a winter afternoon. Caleb tied smoke outside the saloon and pushed through the doors. He spotted Price immediately. The man sat at a corner table, nursing a drink that probably cost more than the average rancher made in a week. He was heavy-set, with a red face and expensive clothes that looked ridiculous in a frontier saloon. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. Caleb walked to the bar and ordered whiskey. He could feel Price watching him. Haven't seen you around before. The bartender, a man named Silas, set down a glass. Thought you were hibernating out there on your ranch. Needed supplies, and maybe some company. Silas raised an eyebrow, but didn't push.
Caleb took his whiskey to a table where he could watch Price without being obvious about it. The lawyer was talking to two men Caleb didn't recognize. Drifters, probably, passing through for the winter. Money changed hands. Information, Caleb thought. He's buying information. After 20 minutes, Price stood and approached the bar. He ordered another drink, then turned and surveyed the room. His eyes landed on Caleb. "You look like a man who knows this territory." Caleb didn't respond. "I'm Cornelius Price." The lawyer extended his hand. "Looking for some information. I'm willing to pay well for it." "A lot of people willing to pay for things out here. Doesn't mean they get what they want." Price's smile didn't waver. "A woman and child, widow of a carpenter. They were heading west when tragedy struck. I represent family members who are desperately worried about them." "Haven't seen any widows." "Are you certain?" "It would have been about 2 weeks ago. The child is young, perhaps 6 years old. Dark hair. The mother would be injured. There was an incident on the road." Caleb's jaw tightened. The man knew too much. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone." Price studied him for a long moment. His small eyes were cold, despite the friendly smile. "May I ask your name?" "You can ask." "But you won't tell me," Price chuckled. "A man with secrets. I understand. We all have things we'd rather keep hidden." He reached into his pocket and produced a card. "If you hear anything at all, I'm staying at the boarding house. There's a substantial reward for information leading to the safe return of Mrs. Brennan and her daughter." Caleb took the card, but said nothing. Price tipped his hat. "Good day, sir." He walked out, leaving the card in Caleb's hand. Caleb looked down at it. The words swam before his eyes. Cornelius Price, attorney at law, representing the interests of Mrs. Harriet Whitfield. Below that, in smaller print, regarding the custody of minor child Margaret Molly Brennan. Custody. The word hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about finding Maggie and Molly. This was about taking Molly away. Legally. Permanently. He crumpled the card and shoved it in his pocket. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than the ride in. By the time Caleb dismounted, his hands were shaking, not from cold. Maggie was waiting on the porch. "What happened? What did he say?" Caleb handed her the crumpled card. He watched her face as she read it, watched the color drain from her cheeks. "Custody." Her voice was barely a whisper. "She's already filed." "We'll fight it." "With what? We have nothing. No money, no lawyer, no—" "We have each other." Maggie looked at him, her eyes wild. "That's not enough. You don't understand. My mother's been planning this. She knew Patrick was dead before I did. She's been waiting for this moment." "How could she know?" "Because—" Maggie stopped. Her face twisted with a realization that seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "Because she sent them. The drifters. My mother sent them." The world tilted. "What?" "She always said she'd make me regret leaving, that she'd take everything from me." Tears streamed down Maggie's face. "She didn't just find us, Caleb. She murdered Patrick. She killed my husband to get to Molly." Caleb caught her as her knees buckled. He held her while she sobbed, his mind racing. Everything had just changed. This wasn't just a custody battle. This was war. Maggie pulled away from Caleb's arms, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set hard. "I need proof." "Maggie, she killed him. She had Patrick murdered, and I need proof." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned. "I won't let her take Molly. Not after what she did. Not ever." Caleb gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. If your mother is capable of ordering a man killed, she's capable of a lot worse. We need to be smart about this."
Smart?
Maggie laughed bitterly.
I've been running for 8 years. Running hasn't worked. It's time to fight.
Then we fight together. But not tonight. Tonight, we plan. Inside, Molly was asleep in the loft, clutching her cloth doll.
Caleb watched Maggie climb the ladder to check on her daughter, watched her press a kiss to the girl's forehead with trembling lips. When she came back down, her eyes were dry.
"Tell me everything about your mother," Caleb said. "Everything that might help us."
They talked until dawn. Maggie told him about growing up in the Whitfield mansion, about a mother who scheduled every moment of her day, who chose her clothes, her friends, her education. About the marriage contract signed when Maggie was 16, promising her to a railroad tycoon old enough to be her grandfather.
"I was property," Maggie said flatly. "A piece of the Whitfield empire to be traded for business advantage. When I refused, she told me I was dead to her. Said she'd make sure I regretted it every day of my life."
And Patrick?
He was the only person who ever saw me. Not the Whitfield name, not the money. Just me.
Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks.
He was kind and gentle, and he made me laugh.
He made me feel like I was worth something beyond what I could bring to a business merger.
Caleb thought about Clara, about the way she'd looked at him like he hung the moon, about the empty years since her death, when no one had looked at him like anything at all. "Your mother," he said carefully. "How far would she go?" "I used to think there were limits, that somewhere beneath the coldness, she loved me." Maggie's voice hardened. "I was wrong. There are no limits. She waited 8 years to destroy my happiness, and she did it without hesitation. We can't prove she sent those men." "No, but we can prove she's unfit to raise Molly. We can prove she's a monster." "How?" Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father." "I thought your father was dead." "He is. But before he died, he wrote letters. To me, to Patrick, to his lawyer. Letters about my mother, about things she'd done." Maggie's hands twisted in her lap. "I never read them."
Patrick kept them hidden in case we ever needed them. He said they were our insurance.
"Where are they now?"
"With the wagon, with Patrick's body." Her voice broke.
"I was so focused on surviving, I forgot about them."
Caleb stood. "Then we go back. First light. The storm has passed. We'll take the wagon. Bring Patrick's body back for a proper burial and find those letters." Maggie stared at him.
"You'd do that? Risk everything for letters that might not even help?"
"I'd do a lot more than that." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to examine. Morning came cold and bright. Caleb hitched the horses to the wagon while Maggie prepared supplies. Molly watched them with wide, worried eyes.
"Where are you going?"
Maggie knelt before her daughter.
"We need to go back to where Papa is, to bring him home." "I want to come." "No, sweetheart. You need to stay here." "But I want to see Papa."
Molly's lower lip trembled.
"I didn't get to say goodbye."
Caleb stepped forward. "Molly, do you remember Widow Cooper from town?" The girl nodded uncertainly. "She's going to stay with you while we're gone. She's got a cat that just had kittens. Maybe she'll let you name one." Molly's eyes flickered with interest, but she shook her head.
"I want to stay with Mama."
"I know." Caleb crouched to her level. "But sometimes, the bravest thing isn't going into danger. It's staying behind and waiting. Can you be brave for your mama?" Molly looked at her mother, then back at Caleb. Something passed across her small face. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance.
"I can be brave."
That's my girl." The words slipped out before Caleb could stop them. Molly's eyes widened, and Maggie made a soft sound. But Molly just smiled, a real smile, the first one that reached her eyes since her father died. "I'll take care of the chickens while you're gone," she said. "And I'll brush all the cats, even the mean one."
Even the mean one. Now that's brave. Ruth Cooper arrived an hour later. The widow was a practical woman in her 50s with strong hands and kind eyes. She'd buried her own husband 15 years ago and raised 3 children alone. If anyone could be trusted, it was her. "You be careful," Ruth said, gripping Maggie's hands. "That lawyer's been asking more questions, offering more money. Has anyone talked?" "Not yet, but people get desperate in winter." Ruth's expression was grim. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast." The ride to the abandoned cabin took most of the day. Caleb pushed the horses as hard as he dared, knowing every hour mattered. Maggie sat beside him, silent and rigid, her eyes fixed on the horizon. When the cabin finally came into view, she made a small, wounded sound. "I can do this alone," Caleb said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." They found Patrick's body where Caleb had left it, frozen and preserved by the cold. Maggie stood over her husband for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she knelt and pressed her forehead to his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I brought her wrath down on us. But I swear to you, Patrick, I swear on everything I am, she won't take Molly. She won't win." Caleb turned away, giving her privacy. His eyes stung, and he told himself it was the wind. They loaded Patrick's body into the wagon. Then Maggie led Caleb to a hidden compartment beneath the wagon's false floor. A secret space Patrick had built for exactly this purpose. Inside were papers, dozens of them, letters in a cramped, masculine hand, legal documents with official seals, photographs that made Maggie gasp. "My father," she breathed, holding up one image. "And my mother, and—" She stopped. Her face went white. "What is it?" Maggie held up a second photograph. This one showed Harriet Whitfield with a man Caleb didn't recognize. They were standing close.
Too close for propriety. "My father's business partner," Maggie said slowly. "Edward Clayton. He died in a fire 6 months before my father passed." Her hands shook. "My mother told everyone it was an accident." "You think it wasn't?" Maggie rifled through the letters, scanning them rapidly. Her breath caught. "Listen to this. My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, I am likely dead. Your mother has discovered my intention to change my will and leave my fortune to you directly, bypassing her control. She has threatened my life. I fear she will make good on that threat. Know that I always loved you, even when I was too weak to show it. Know that your mother is not the woman she pretends to be. Edward Clayton can confirm everything I've written here. Find him. He will help you." "But Clayton is dead." "Conveniently," Maggie's voice was bitter. "Just like my father. Just like Patrick. Everyone who gets in her way ends up dead." Caleb took the letters gently from her hands. "This is evidence. Real evidence. If we can get this to a judge, we need more. We need someone who knows what she did. Someone who can testify." "Your father mentioned a lawyer." Maggie nodded slowly. "Jameson Holt. He handled my father's affairs for 30 years. If anyone knows the truth, it's him." "Is he still alive?" "I don't know. I haven't had contact with anyone from that world in 8 years." Caleb made a decision. "Then we find out. We send a telegram. Carefully. Cornelius Price will be watching the telegraph office. Then we don't send it from Elk Creek. There's another office in Helena. 2 days' ride." "That's too long. Price could make his move while we're gone."
Then I go alone. You stay with Molly. Maggie grabbed his arm. No, I won't let you face this alone. And I won't let that lawyer get anywhere near you or Molly while I'm gone. Caleb covered her hand with his. Ruth will stay at the ranch. She's got a shotgun and she knows how to use it. Price is a lawyer, not a gunfighter. He won't try anything while I'm away. You don't know that. I know we don't have a choice. They buried Patrick behind the ranch, in a spot overlooking the valley. The ground was frozen hard, and it took Caleb most of a day to dig the grave. Maggie and Molly stood together, while Reverend Mills, the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, spoke words over the body. "The Lord is my shepherd," the old preacher intoned. "I shall not want." Molly cried quietly, her face buried in her mother's skirt. Maggie stood straight and still, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand gripping her daughter's shoulder. Caleb watched them and felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. These were his people now, his family. He'd lost one family to forces beyond his control. He wouldn't lose another. That night, after Molly was asleep, Maggie found him packing for the journey to Helena.
"Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you did today." Patrick deserved a proper burial. "I meant for everything. For finding us. For taking us in. For fighting a battle that isn't yours."
Caleb stopped packing. "It is my battle now."
"Why?"
He turned to face her. The lamplight caught the tears still glistening on her cheeks, the exhaustion in her eyes, the fierce determination that refused to break despite everything. Because I spent 9 years telling myself I didn't need anyone, that being alone was easier, safer. He took a step toward her. Then you and Molly walked into my life, and I remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting.
"Caleb."
I know it's too soon. I know you're grieving. I'm not asking for anything. His voice roughened. But I need you to understand. Whatever happens with your mother, with the lawyers, with all of it, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Maggie's breath caught. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then she crossed the distance between them and pressed her forehead to his chest.
"I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared."
Caleb wrapped his arms around her. I know.
"What if it isn't enough? The letters, the evidence? What if she takes Molly anyway?"
Then we run. Start over somewhere she can't find us. Mexico, Canada, California, I don't care where. But she's not taking Molly. Not while I'm breathing. Maggie pulled back to look at him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she found made her expression soften.
"You really mean that?"
Every word. She reached up and touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold, but her touch burned through him like fire.
"I don't deserve you, Caleb Thornton."
Pretty sure it's the other way around. She almost smiled. Almost. Caleb left for Helena before dawn. The ride was brutal. Winter had loosened its grip slightly, but the roads were still treacherous, the wind still biting. Caleb pushed himself and Smoke to their limits, sleeping in snatches when he had to, eating in the saddle. He reached Helena on the second afternoon and went straight to the telegraph office. The message he sent was short and coded. Maggie had helped him compose it before he left. To Jameson Holt, attorney at law, Philadelphia, friend of Margaret Whitfield. Needs your help. Stop. Urgent matter regarding estate. Stop. Reply to general delivery. Helena. Stop. Then he waited. 2 days. 2 days of pacing the small boarding house room, of watching the telegraph office, of fighting the urge to ride back to the ranch and make sure Maggie and Molly were safe. On the third morning, a reply came. Will help. Stop. Harriet dangerous. Stop. Have evidence. Stop. Arriving Montana in 2 weeks. Stop. Tell Margaret to trust no one. Stop. Especially Price. Stop. Caleb's hands shook as he read it. Evidence.
Jameson Holt had evidence, and he was coming. But 2 weeks was a long time, too long. He sent one more telegram, this one to Sheriff Wade in Elk Creek. Keep an eye on my ranch. Stop. Trouble coming. Stop. Will explain when I return. Stop. The ride back felt endless. Every mile, Caleb fought the fear that he'd arrived to find the ranch empty, that Price had made his move while Caleb was gone, that Maggie and Molly were already on a train heading east. When the ranch finally appeared on the horizon, smoke rising from the chimney, his whole body sagged with relief. Maggie was on the porch before he'd even dismounted. She threw herself into his arms, clutching him like she'd never let go. "I was so scared," she gasped. "Every day I was so scared." "I'm here." He held her tight. "I'm here." Molly ran out next, wrapping her small arms around both of them. "You came back." "Course I did. Told you I wasn't going anywhere." Inside, Caleb shared the news from Helena. Maggie's face lit up when she heard about Jameson Holt. He was the only decent man in my father's circle, the only one who ever treated me like a person instead of a Whitfield asset. Her hands pressed to her mouth. "If he has evidence against my mother, then we have a chance, a real chance." 2 weeks, Maggie breathed. "We just have to hold on for 2 weeks." But they didn't have 2 weeks. The next morning, Sheriff Wade rode up with grim news. "Price has filed papers with the territorial court. Emergency custody hearing set for 4 days from now." Maggie went pale. 4 days? "He's claiming the child is in immediate danger, that she's being held by dangerous individuals who mean her harm." Wade's jaw was tight with anger. "Judge Harrison has agreed to hear the case." Harrison. Caleb's stomach dropped. "He's fair, isn't he?" "He was, but he owes money to the mining company. And guess who just bought a controlling interest in that company?" Wade didn't wait for an answer. "Harriet Whitfield. She's been busy while you were in Helena, Caleb. She arrived yesterday, staying at the best hotel in town. Already met with Harrison privately." "That's corruption," Maggie said. That's how money works." Wade looked at Caleb. "I'm sorry. I'll do what I can, but my hands are tied. This is a custody matter, not criminal." After Wade left, Maggie sat at the table with her head in her hands. "It's over. She's bought everyone. The judge, the lawyers, probably half the town." Her voice was hollow. "I can't win against her. I've never been able to win against her." "Don't." Caleb's voice was sharp. "Don't give up." "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic." "Then be realistic about this." He crouched before her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Your mother is powerful, rich, connected, but she's not invincible. Nobody is. You don't understand. I understand she murdered your husband. I understand she's trying to steal your daughter. I understand she spent her whole life making you feel small and weak and powerless." His hands gripped hers. "But you're not any of those things, Maggie. You're the woman who walked away from a fortune to be with a man you loved. You're the mother who kept her daughter alive for 3 days in the wilderness. You're the person who's still standing after everything she's thrown at you." Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks. "I don't know how to beat her." "Then we figure it out together. But we don't quit. We don't run. We stand and fight." Maggie stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, he saw fire. "Okay," she whispered. "We fight." The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Caleb gathered character witnesses. Ruth Cooper, who testified to Maggie's devotion to Molly. Doc Henley, who documented Maggie's injuries and their suspicious origin. Reverend Mills, who spoke of the tender burial service he'd witnessed. Maggie organized her father's letters, creating a timeline of Harriet Whitfield's crimes. She couldn't prove her mother had sent the drifters who killed Patrick, but she could paint a picture of a woman capable of anything. The morning of the hearing, Molly clung to her mother's skirt. "Don't let the mean lady take me." Maggie knelt and cupped her daughter's face. "Listen to me, Molly. No matter what happens today, you are my daughter. Mine. Nothing and no one can change that. Do you understand?" Molly nodded, her eyes huge and frightened. "And Caleb loves you too. We both do. Whatever happens, you're not alone." Caleb's heart clenched. It was the first time either of them had used the word love. The courthouse was packed. Harriet Whitfield sat in the front row, dressed in expensive black, her face a mask of righteous concern. Beside her, Cornelius Price looked like a cat who'd already caught the mouse. Judge Harrison called the proceedings to order. His eyes kept darting to Harriet Whitfield, and Caleb felt sick. This was rigged from the start. Price went first, painting Maggie as an unfit mother who'd abandoned her family, made reckless choices, and was now living in sin with a violent stranger. He produced witnesses, people Caleb didn't recognize, who claimed to have seen Maggie neglect her child. "The grandmother offers stability," Price concluded, "wealth, education, a future. The child deserves better than a rough cabin and a mother too broken to care for her." Maggie's face was white, but she sat straight and still. When it was her turn to speak, she stood with quiet dignity. "I didn't abandon my family. I chose my family. I chose Patrick and I chose Molly. And I chose a life built on love instead of money." Her voice was steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "My mother called that abandonment because I didn't do what she wanted. But making your own choices isn't abandonment. It's freedom." She produced the letters, read passages aloud, described her father's fears, Clayton's convenient death, the fire that had killed him. "My mother doesn't want Molly because she loves her," Maggie said. "She wants to control her, the same way she controlled me, the same way she controls everyone." Price objected. Harrison overruled weakly. The crowd murmured. Then Harriet Whitfield stood. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Harrison nodded, looking relieved. Harriet walked to the front of the courtroom. She was smaller than Caleb had expected, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like a queen. "I am not the monster my daughter has painted," she said smoothly. "I am a mother who made difficult choices. A mother who watched her daughter throw away every advantage, every opportunity, for a man who couldn't provide for her." "He provided love," Maggie shot back. Harriet's smile was cold. "Love doesn't pay bills, dear. Love doesn't protect a child from hardship. Love is what foolish women tell themselves when they've made choices they can't justify." "You don't know anything about love." "Perhaps not," Harriet's eyes glittered. "But I know about survival, about building empires, about ensuring the Whitfield legacy continues." She turned to the judge. "My granddaughter is the sole heir to a fortune. Do you really believe she's better off in a dirt floor cabin with a widow and a stranger than in the finest home money can buy?" Judge Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Whitfield, the matter before the court is the child's well-being, not—" "Her well-being is exactly my concern." Harriet's voice hardened. "Look at my daughter, thin, exhausted, still recovering from injuries sustained because her husband couldn't protect her. Is that the environment a child should grow up in?" Caleb couldn't stay silent anymore. He stood, and every eye in the courtroom turned to him. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Harrison hesitated, then nodded. Caleb walked forward. He could feel Harriet's icy gaze on him, assessing him,
dismissing him. "I'm Caleb Thornton. I own the ranch where Maggie and Molly are staying." He faced the judge directly. "I found them 2 weeks ago, half dead in an abandoned cabin. The child was standing over her mother's body with a broken shovel, ready to fight anyone who came near her." He paused, letting that image sink in. "That's not a child who's been neglected. That's a child who's been loved so fierce she was willing to die for it. I've seen a lot of things in my life, Your Honor. I served in the war. I buried my own wife and daughter. I know what love looks like, and I know what cruelty looks like." He turned to face Harriet Whitfield. "This woman talks about legacy and fortune and survival, but she's never once mentioned what Molly wants. Never asked what's best for the child's heart, only what's best for her bank account." "Mr. Thornton," Harrison interrupted weakly, "this is highly irregular. So is buying a judge." The courtroom exploded. People shouting, Harrison banging his gavel, Price leaping to his feet with objections. Through it all, Harriet Whitfield's expression never changed. She just looked at Caleb with those cold, calculating eyes. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said softly. So softly, only he could hear. "Neither do you," he replied. When order was finally restored, Harrison looked rattled. His hands shook as he shuffled his papers. I will take all testimony under advisement. Court is recessed until tomorrow morning, when I will render my decision." As people filed out, Cornelius Price approached Caleb. "Bold move accusing a judge of corruption in his own courtroom, but it won't matter. Harrison will rule in our favor. Mrs. Whitfield always wins." "Not this time." Price smiled his oily smile. "We'll see." Outside, Maggie grabbed Caleb's arm. "You called him corrupt, in front of everyone. He'll never rule in our favor now." "He was never going to rule in our favor." Caleb looked at her steadily. "But now everyone knows why. Now there are witnesses. If he rules against us, there'll be questions, appeals, investigations." "You're gambling with my daughter's life." "I'm fighting for it. The only way I know how." That night, Caleb sat on the porch staring at the stars. Maggie appeared beside him, wrapped in a blanket. "I couldn't sleep either." "Thinking about tomorrow?" "Thinking about everything." She sat down, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Caleb, whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know—" "Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't say goodbye." "I'm not." She turned to face him. "I'm saying thank you for fighting for us, for standing up to her when no one else ever has." "It's not enough." "It might not be, but it matters." She took his hand. "You matter. To me. To Molly." Caleb looked at their intertwined fingers, his rough, calloused hand wrapped around her smaller, softer one. "Marry me." The words came out before he could stop them. Maggie's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me, tonight, before the hearing." His heart was pounding. "If we're married, your mother's case falls apart. You're not a destitute widow anymore. You're my wife, living on my ranch, with my name and my protection." "Caleb, you can't." "I can. I want to." He faced her fully. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I know enough. I know you're brave and strong and stubborn as hell. I know Molly looks at me like I'm already her father. I know that when I think about the future, you're both in it." Tears streamed down Maggie's face.
"You'd do that? Give up your freedom, your solitude, everything you've built? For us?"
"It wouldn't be giving up anything. It would be gaining everything." Maggie stared at him for a long, trembling moment. Then she said yes. Reverend Mills married them that night by candlelight. Ruth Cooper served as witness. her weathered face soft with tears. Molly stood between them, holding both their hands, not quite understanding what was happening, but sensing its importance. "Do you, Caleb Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Margaret Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Maggie's voice trembled. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by God and the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb looked at the woman who was now his wife. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands shaking. This wasn't how either of them had imagined getting married.
No celebration, no joy, just desperation and determination. But when she looked back at him, he saw something else there too. Something that looked almost like hope. "You may kiss the bride." The kiss was brief, gentle, a promise more than a passion. When they pulled apart, Molly tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Does this mean you're my papa now?" Caleb's throat closed up. He knelt before her, this fierce little girl who'd stolen his heart without even trying. "If you want me to be." Molly considered this with the gravity only a 6-year-old could muster. Then she threw her arms around his neck. "I want you to be." Caleb held her tight, his eyes stinging. Over her shoulder, he saw Maggie crying silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. They'd become a family, imperfect, improvised, born from tragedy and fear, but a family nonetheless. Ruth stayed the night, and in the morning they all rode into town together for the hearing.
Maggie wore her best dress, the same one she'd worn to Patrick's funeral, and carried their marriage certificate like a shield. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Word had spread about Caleb's accusation against the judge, and half the town had come to watch the spectacle. Harriet Whitfield was already seated when they arrived. Her eyes tracked to the marriage certificate in Maggie's hand, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or fury. "What is this?" Price demanded, snatching the document. "My marriage certificate. I wed Caleb Thornton last night." Maggie's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "I am no longer a destitute widow. I have a husband, a home, and the means to provide for my daughter." Price's face went red. He turned to Harriet, whispering urgently. Harriet's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on her purse until her knuckles went white. Judge Harrison called the court to order. He looked nervous, sweating despite the cold, his eyes darting between Harriet and the packed gallery. "I have reviewed the testimony from yesterday's proceedings and considered all relevant factors," he began. "However, I've been informed of a development." He held up a copy of the marriage certificate. Price had apparently wasted no time. "Mrs. Mrs. Thornton, was married last night to Mr. Caleb Thornton." Harrison cleared his throat. "This significantly alters the circumstances of the case." "Your Honor," Price rose quickly, "we submit that this marriage is nothing more than a legal maneuver, a sham designed to circumvent my client's legitimate concerns." "It's a legal marriage," Caleb interrupted, "performed by a licensed minister with witnesses present. If Mr. Price has evidence to the contrary, I'd like to hear it." Price's mouth opened and closed. Harrison looked relieved to have a reason to delay. "The court will require time to assess how this development affects the petition," he said. "We will recess until—" "Your Honor," a new voice cut through the murmur. "If I may." Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, lean and silver-haired, dressed in clothes that spoke of Eastern money, but worn with the ease of long travel. Maggie gasped. "Mr. Holt!" Jameson Holt walked down the aisle, his eyes fixed on Harriet Whitfield. She had gone absolutely still, her face draining of color. "Jameson," her voice was barely a whisper, "what are you doing here?" "What I should have done years ago, Harriet."
Holt stopped before the judge's bench. Your Honor, my name is Jameson Holt. I was the personal attorney for the late Charles Whitfield, Mrs. Whitfield's husband. I have evidence relevant to this proceeding that I believe the court must hear. Harrison looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse.
Mr. Holt, this is highly irregular. So is a grandmother using the courts to steal her grandchild after arranging the murder of the child's father. The courtroom exploded. People shouted. Harriet shot to her feet. Price was screaming objections. Harrison banged his gavel so hard it cracked. Through it all, Jameson Holt stood calm and still, holding a leather satchel that seemed to contain the weight of years.
Order, Harrison bellowed. Order, or I'll clear this courtroom. Slowly, silence returned. But it was the silence of a powder keg waiting for a spark. Mr. Holt, Harrison said carefully, you're making a very serious accusation. I'm aware, Your Honor, and I have evidence to support it. Holt opened his satchel and produced a stack of papers. These are letters written by Charles Whitfield in the final months of his life.
They detail his wife's systematic embezzlement from his company, her affair with his business partner, Edward Clayton, and her threats against his life when he discovered the truth.
Lies, Harriet hissed. All lies.
The letters are in Charles's own hand, authenticated by 3 independent experts.
Holt's voice was ice.
Charles also documented his suspicions that his wife planned to have Clayton killed to ensure his silence. Clayton died in a fire 3 months before Charles himself passed.
My husband died of heart failure.
Your husband died of arsenic poisoning, administered slowly over several months. Holt produced another document. This is a report from a physician who examined Charles's symptoms before his death. At the time, he attributed them to natural causes. I've since had his notes reviewed by specialists in Boston. The pattern is unmistakable. Maggie's hand found Caleb's. Her grip was crushing.
You poisoned my father, she breathed.
All those months he was sick, getting weaker. It was you.
Harriet's composure finally cracked.
You don't understand anything. Your father was weak, sentimental. He was going to give away everything we'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, to you and that carpenter.
So you killed him.
I protected our legacy. Harriet's eyes blazed. The same way I've always protected it. The same way I'll continue to protect it. Molly is a Whitfield. She belongs with me, not with you and your pathetic attempts at independence.
Mrs. Whitfield, Harrison's voice was shaking. I strongly advise you to stop speaking.
Why? Because the truth is inconvenient?
Harriet laughed, a high, brittle sound.
You're all so naive. You think the law matters? The law is whatever I pay it to be. Your precious judge here knows that well enough.
Harrison went white. The gallery murmured.
She promised me $5,000 to rule in her favor,
Harrison said suddenly, his voice cracking.
God forgive me. I was going to do it. I needed the money. The mining company. I owed them.
John, Price's voice was sharp. Shut up.
But Harrison seemed beyond caring. The weight of his corruption had finally become too heavy to carry. I can't do this anymore. I won't. He looked at Maggie. Mrs. Thornton, I apologize. Whatever ruling I make today, it won't be bought. Harriet's face twisted with rage. You pathetic little man. I made you. I can destroy you just as easily. Perhaps. Harrison straightened in his chair with the dignity of a man who'd found his spine at last. But not today. He turned to face the courtroom. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds no basis for the custody petition filed by Harriet Whitfield. The child, Molly, shall remain in the custody of her mother, Margaret Thornton, and her stepfather, Caleb Thornton.
Maggie collapsed against Caleb, sobbing. Molly rushed forward and threw herself into her mother's arms.
But Harriet wasn't finished. This isn't over. Her voice cut through the celebration like a blade. Do you hear me, Margaret? This will never be over. I will appeal. I will find new lawyers, new judges. I will pursue you to the ends of the earth. No, Mother. Maggie lifted her head, her cheeks wet, but her eyes blazing. You won't. You think a piece of paper protects you? You think this frontier court means anything? I think you just confessed to murder in front of 50 witnesses. Maggie's voice was steady now, calm. I think Mr. Holt has evidence that will see you hanged or imprisoned for the rest of your life. And I think that for the first time in your miserable existence, you have no power over me. Harriet went still. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization that she'd finally lost. Then her expression hardened into something cold and terrible. You're just like your father. Weak. Sentimental. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner. Harriet turned to Price. Get me out of here. But Sheriff Wade was already moving, 2 deputies at his side. Harriet Whitfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Wade's voice was grim but satisfied. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise it. Harriet's face contorted with fury. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are. Wade nodded to his deputies. Take her. They let her out, still protesting, still threatening. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as one of the wealthiest women in America was marched away in handcuffs. When she was gone, Maggie turned to Jameson Holt. How? Her voice was barely a whisper. How did you get here so fast? Caleb only sent the telegram a few days ago. I was already on my way. Holt's stern face softened. I've been tracking your mother's movements for months, ever since I discovered what she did to your father. When I learned she'd filed custody papers in Montana, I knew I had to act. You could have come forward years ago, when my father died. I could have. I should have. Holt's eyes were heavy with regret. I was a coward, Margaret, afraid of her power, her reach. I told myself I was protecting myself, but really, I was just a frightened old man who let a murderer go free. Why now? Because I got your husband's telegram and realized you were still fighting, still standing. Holt took her hands. Your father would be so proud of you. He always said you were the strongest of all of us. He was right. Maggie's tears fell freely now. I wish I could have saved him. So do I. But you can still save your daughter. You already have. Holt looked at Caleb. Thank you for protecting them. Charles always hoped Margaret would find someone worthy of her.
Caleb didn't know what to say. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words.
Outside the courthouse, the cold air hit them like a blessing. Maggie stood on the steps, holding Molly's hand, and breathed deep. It's over. Her voice was wondering. It's really over. Not quite. Caleb put his arm around her. Your mother still has to stand trial. There'll be more hearings, more testimony. But she can't take Molly. Not now. Not ever. No, she can't. Molly tugged on Maggie's dress. Mama, is the mean lady going away forever? Maggie knelt before her daughter. Yes, sweetheart. She's going away for a very long time. Good. Molly's small face was fierce. She made you cry, and she hurt Papa. She deserves to go away. Out of the mouths of babes, Ruth murmured behind them. They rode back to the ranch in a daze. The relief was so overwhelming it felt almost unreal, like waking from a nightmare to find the sun shining. Caleb kept stealing glances at Maggie, his wife.
The words still felt strange in his mind, but strange in a good way, like a new pair of boots that hadn't been broken in yet.
"What are you thinking?" Maggie asked.
That I can't quite believe it. Any of it.
"The trial? Or the marriage?"
Both.
Maggie laughed, and the sound was like music. "I keep waiting to wake up and find it was all a dream. That we're still in that cabin, and Patrick is still alive, and none of this ever happened. Would you want that? If you could go back?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "I miss Patrick. I'll always miss him. He was a good man and a good father, and he didn't deserve what happened to him." She took Caleb's hand. "But if none of this had happened, I never would have found you. And right now, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Caleb's heart swelled. "Maggie, I know we married for practical reasons. I know this isn't a love story in the traditional sense.
But when you asked me last night, when you offered to give up your solitude, your peace, everything you'd built,
I felt something." Her eyes met his. Something that felt like the beginning of something real. "It is real." Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. "Maggie, I've spent 9 years convincing myself I was better off alone. That love was too dangerous, too painful, not worth the risk. Then you and Molly crashed into my life, and suddenly all those walls I'd built didn't mean anything." "Caleb." "I'm not good with words, never have been. But I can tell you this." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "When I look at you, I don't see a burden or an obligation or a practical arrangement. I see the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. If you'll have me. Really have me." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I'll have you." She kissed him then, and it wasn't the gentle, chaste kiss of their wedding. It was something deeper.
Something that tasted like hope and healing and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine.
When they finally pulled apart, Molly's voice piped up from the wagon bed. "Are you done being mushy? I'm hungry." Caleb laughed, a real laugh, the first one in years. Maggie joined him, and soon all three of them were laughing, the sound echoing across the Montana plains like a song. They were home. The days that followed were strange and wonderful. Caleb had to learn how to share his space, his routines, his life. After 9 years alone, every small adjustment felt monumental. 2 more people at the breakfast table. Laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for so long. A child's drawings appearing on the walls. Maggie took over the household with quiet efficiency, but she was careful not to erase Clara's memory. When she found a dried flower pressed in one of Caleb's books, she didn't throw it away. She just put it back and never mentioned it.
"You don't have to pretend she didn't exist," Caleb said one night, watching Maggie fold laundry.
"I know," Maggie looked up. "And you don't have to pretend Patrick didn't exist. They're part of who we are. They're part of what brought us here." "You're a wise woman, Maggie Thornton." She smiled. "I have my moments." Molly adapted with the resilience of youth. She threw herself into ranch life, helping with the chickens, learning to ride, even attempting to milk the cow with disastrous results. She still had nightmares sometimes, still clutched her father's doll like a lifeline, but she was healing. One afternoon, about a week after the trial, Caleb found her sitting by Patrick's grave. "You okay?" He sat down beside her. "I was telling Papa about the chickens." Molly's voice was matter-of-fact. "He would have liked them. He always said he wanted to live on a farm." "I bet he would have been good at it." "He was good at everything." Molly's lower lip trembled. "I miss him."
"I know you do. Mama says it's okay to love you and still miss Papa. Is that true?"
Caleb's chest ached. "That's true. Love isn't a bucket that runs out. It's more like a well. The more you use, the more there is. Molly considered this. So I can love Papa and love you and love Mama all at the same time? All at the same time. Good. She leaned against his arm. Because I do. Love you, I mean. Caleb wrapped his arm around her small shoulders. I love you too, Molly. They sat there together, the living and the memory of the dead, and somehow it felt right. News from town came in pieces. Sheriff Wade rode out every few days to update them on Harriet's case. She's being transferred to federal custody, Wade reported one morning. The murder charges are being handled by prosecutors in Philadelphia. Seems your mother-in-law made some powerful enemies over the years. They're lining up to testify against her. Will she hang? Maggie asked. Probably not. Her lawyers are already working on a deal. Life in prison, most likely. Wade shook his head. Money can't buy freedom this time, but it can still buy comfort. She'll probably end up in some fancy asylum instead of a regular prison. As long as she can't hurt anyone else. She can't, not anymore. After Wade left, Maggie stood at the window for a long time. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. I keep waiting to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. But mostly I just feel empty. She's still your mother. Is she? Maggie turned to face him. A mother protects her children. A mother puts her family first. She never did either of those things. I don't think she even knows what love is. Maybe that's the saddest part. Maggie's eyes glistened. Maybe it is. 3 weeks after the trial, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. It was from Jameson Holt. He's found more evidence, Maggie said, scanning the pages. My father had a second will, hidden with a bank in New York. It leaves everything, the company, the properties, all of it, to me, bypassing my mother entirely. Caleb whistled. That's millions of dollars. Maggie looked up, her face pale. Caleb, I'm rich. He didn't know what to say. His mind raced through implications, complications, all the ways money could change things. Does it matter? He finally asked. Does what matter? The money. Does it change anything? About us? Maggie set down the letter. She crossed the room and took his hands. 9 years ago, I gave up a fortune to be with a man I loved. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Her eyes searched his. Money didn't make me happy then. It won't make me happy now. You make me happy. Molly makes me happy. This life, here, on this ranch, that's what matters. But I know what you're thinking. That I'll get bored. That I'll miss the fancy life. That one day I'll wake up and regret choosing a dirt floor cabin over a mansion. Maggie shook her head. I won't. I've already made that choice once. I'd make it 1,000 times. This cabin doesn't have dirt floors. She laughed. You know what I mean. Caleb pulled her close. So what do we do with millions of dollars? Whatever we want. Build a bigger house, buy more land, help Ruth Cooper pay off her debts. Maggie's eyes sparkled. Send Molly to the best school in the territory. Build a church in town. Fund a doctor's office. You've thought about this. I've thought about what my father would have wanted. He wasn't like my mother. He believed money should help people, not control them. She pulled back to look at Caleb. We can do good with this, real good. But only if we do it together. Together. Caleb tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I like the sound of that. That night, after Molly was asleep, Caleb and Maggie sat on the porch watching the stars. You know what I realized today? Maggie said softly. What? This is the first time in my life I'm not afraid. Caleb turned to look at her. Not afraid of anything? Not of my mother, not of poverty, not of the future. She leaned her head on his shoulder.
For the first time in 32 years, I feel safe. Really, truly safe.
Because of the money?
Because of you.
She tilted her face up to his.
You saved my life, Caleb Thornton, in more ways than one.
You saved mine, too. They kissed under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by silence and starlight, and the promise of a tomorrow that no longer held any fear. Inside, Molly slept peacefully, her father's doll tucked under her chin. Outside, the world turned on, indifferent to the small triumphs and tragedies of human hearts. But in that moment, on that porch, none of it mattered. They had each other. They had Molly. They had a future. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.
Spring arrived in Montana like a promise kept.
The snow melted slowly, revealing the land beneath. Caleb watched the world transform from white to brown to green, and he thought about all the transformations he'd witnessed in the past few months. Maggie stood beside him on the porch, her hand warm in his.
It's beautiful, she said softly.
It is now. She looked at him.
Now?
Before you came, it was just empty space. Now it feels like something worth looking at. Maggie squeezed his hand.
You're getting better with words, Caleb Thornton.
Don't spread that around. I have a reputation to maintain. She laughed, and the sound still made his heart skip. He wondered if it always would. Molly came running from the barn, her dress already dirty despite Maggie's warnings.
Mama, Papa Caleb, the kittens opened their eyes.
She grabbed both their hands and dragged them toward the barn, her excitement infectious. Caleb let himself be pulled along, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. 3 months ago, he'd been a ghost haunting his own life. Now he was a husband, a father, a man with a reason to get up every morning. The kittens were indeed awake. 5 tiny furballs stumbling blindly around their mother. Molly knelt beside them with the reverence of a child discovering magic.
Can I keep all of them?
Molly, Maggie warned.
Just one then, please. I'll take care of it, I promise.
Caleb and Maggie exchanged a look over their daughter's head. Their daughter. The word still gave him chills. You can keep one, Caleb said, but only if you do your chores without being asked for a whole week.
I will, I promise.
Molly threw her arms around his neck.
Thank you, Papa Caleb.
He held her tight, breathing in the smell of hay and childhood and something that felt like redemption. That afternoon, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Maggie's hands trembled as she opened it. Caleb stood close, ready to catch her if the news was bad.
It's from Jameson Holt.
She scanned the pages quickly.
My mother's trial is over.
And?
Life in prison. She'll be transferred to an asylum in New York.
Maggie's voice was hollow.
She tried to blame everyone else. Her lawyers, Price, even my father. Said she was a victim of circumstances.
Did anyone believe her?
12 jurors didn't.
Maggie set down the letter.
It's strange. I thought I'd feel something when this moment came. Relief, maybe. Or vindication.
What do you feel?
Sad. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I feel sad, Caleb. She's my mother. She murdered my father, had Patrick killed, tried to steal my daughter. And still, there's a part of me that wishes things could have been different.
Caleb pulled her into his arms. That makes you human, Maggie, not weak.
Sometimes I wonder what she was like before. Before the money, before the power.
Was she always like this? Or did something break her?
Does it matter?
I don't know.
Maggie pulled back to look at him.
I just keep thinking about Molly.
about what kind of mother I want to be, about breaking the cycle.
You already have.
Have I?
Look at that girl. Caleb nodded toward the barn, where Molly was teaching one of the kittens to climb her arm. She's happy. She's loved. She knows who she is and where she belongs. That's because of you. Maggie's tears spilled over.
And you?
Both of us then. They stood there, holding each other, while their daughter's laughter floated across the yard like music. Summer brought changes. Caleb hired 2 hands to help with the ranch, which had expanded considerably thanks to Maggie's inheritance. The new barn went up in June, twice the size of the old one. A proper schoolhouse followed in August, built on the edge of town with Maggie's money and Caleb's labor.
You didn't have to do all this, Maggie said, watching him hammer the last nail into the schoolhouse roof.
Molly needs somewhere to learn.
She could have gone to Helena. There are proper schools there.
She belongs here. Caleb wiped the sweat from his brow. We all do. Ruth Cooper was named the first teacher, a role she accepted with tears and protests about not being qualified. But she was smart and patient and loved children, and the schoolhouse filled up quickly with kids from ranches all across the valley. Molly thrived. She was the best reader in her class, thanks to Caleb's patient lessons. She still had nightmares sometimes, still clutched her father's doll when the dark felt too heavy. But she was healing. One evening, she came to Caleb with a serious expression.
Can I ask you something?
Always.
Do you think Papa Patrick can see me from heaven?
Caleb's throat tightened. He set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. I think he can.
Do you think he's proud of me?
I know he is.
How do you know?
Because I'm proud of you, Caleb said. And if a grumpy old rancher like me can see how special you are, then your papa definitely can. Molly climbed into his lap, something she'd started doing more often.
Papa Caleb?
Yeah?
I'm glad you found us, even though it was a sad day. I'm glad.
Me too, Molly. Me too. Fall arrived with news that changed everything. Maggie was sick for 3 mornings in a row before she finally told Caleb what she suspected. He found her in the kitchen, pale and trembling, and his heart dropped. What's wrong? Is it your shoulder? Should I fetch the doctor?
I don't need a doctor.
She looked up at him with something that might have been terror, or joy, or both.
Caleb, I'm pregnant.
The world stopped. What?
I'm going to have a baby. Our baby.
Caleb sat down heavily, his legs suddenly unable to support him. A baby. Another child. His child.
Caleb? Say something.
He couldn't find words. His mind was flooded with images. Clara's swollen belly, Rose's tiny fingers, the empty grave where half his heart was buried.
Are you upset?
Maggie's voice cracked.
I know we didn't plan this. I know it's complicated. If you're not ready,
I'm terrified. Maggie's face fell.
Oh.
No, you don't understand. Caleb crossed to her and took her hands. I'm terrified because I remember what it felt like to lose them. Clara and Rose. I remember the fever, the helplessness, the way they slipped away no matter how hard I held on.
Caleb,
but I'm also happy. His voice roughened. Maggie, I'm so happy I don't know what to do with it. A baby. Our baby. A chance to do it right this time. Tears streamed down Maggie's face. You're not disappointed? How could I be disappointed? You've given me everything. He pulled her close. A wife, a daughter, a family, and now this. I was so scared to tell you.
Don't ever be scared to tell me anything.
They held each other in the kitchen while the autumn wind rattled the windows,
and Caleb felt something inside him shift into place. The last piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. They told Molly that night. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming.
A baby? A real baby? I'm going to be a sister?
You're going to be a big sister, Maggie confirmed.
The best big sister in the whole world.
Molly threw herself at both of them.
I'll teach the baby everything. How to read, how to ride, how to feed the chickens. Can we name it Buttercup if it's a girl? Or Thunder if it's a boy?
We'll talk about names later, Caleb said, hiding a smile.
When will it get here?
Spring, Maggie said, around the time the snow melts.
That's forever away.
It'll come faster than you think. The months that followed were the happiest of Caleb's life. He watched Maggie's body change, watched her belly swell with new life. He held her when the morning sickness was bad, rubbed her feet when they ached, told her she was beautiful when she felt anything but.
You're just saying that because you're my husband,
she grumbled one evening, struggling to find a comfortable position. I'm saying it because it's true.
I look like a whale.
You look like the mother of my child. Nothing more beautiful than that. Molly was fascinated by the whole process. She talked to the baby through Maggie's belly, told it stories about the ranch, made a list of all the things she was going to teach it.
Do you think it can hear me?
I think it knows your voice, Maggie said.
Good. I want it to know I love it already.
Caleb had to turn away to hide his tears. Winter came again, but this time it felt different. There was warmth in the house that had nothing to do with the fire. Laughter rang from the walls. The smell of Maggie's cooking filled every room. And every night, Caleb went to sleep with his hand resting on his wife's belly, feeling their child kick against his palm. Do you ever think about Clara? Maggie asked one night. The question surprised him. They rarely talked about his first wife. Sometimes. What do you think about? How different she was from you. Caleb stared at the ceiling. Clara was soft, gentle. She trusted everyone and saw the best in everything. She was like sunshine. And me? You're fire. He turned to look at her. You burn bright and fierce. You don't trust easily, but when you do, it's complete. Clara would have liked you. You think so? I know so. He kissed her forehead. She'd be happy I found you. Happy I stopped hiding from life. I'm glad I found you too. You didn't find me. I found you. Stubborn man. We found each other. The baby came on a March morning, just as the first signs of spring were appearing. The labor was long and hard, and Caleb spent most of it pacing outside the bedroom door, while Ruth Cooper and Doc Henley worked inside. Molly sat beside him, holding his hand, her face pale but determined.
Mama's strong, she said. She'll be okay.
I know.
Are you scared?
A little.
Me too.
Molly squeezed his hand tighter.
But we can be scared together.
Caleb looked at this girl who'd come into his life clutching a broken shovel, ready to fight the world. She was still fierce, still brave, still more than her small body could contain. And somehow, she'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. I love you, Molly.
I love you too, Papa Caleb.
A cry pierced the air. Caleb was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. The bedroom door opened, and Ruth appeared, tears streaming down her weathered face.
It's a boy, a healthy baby boy.
The world blurred. Caleb pushed past Ruth into the bedroom, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Maggie was lying in the bed, pale and exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But her smile was radiant as she held up the tiny bundle in her arms.
Come meet your son.
Caleb approached on legs that shook. He looked down at the baby, red-faced, wrinkled, utterly perfect, and felt something crack open inside him.
He's beautiful,
he whispered. "He has your eyes." Caleb couldn't speak. The baby's eyes were closed, but he could see the shape of them, the set of the tiny features. His son. His and Maggie's son. "Do you want to hold him?" Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice. Maggie placed the baby in his arms, and the weight of that small body was the heaviest thing he'd ever carried. "Hello," he managed. "I'm your papa." The baby yawned, one tiny fist escaping the blanket to wave in the air. Caleb caught the fist gently in his fingers, and the baby gripped him with surprising strength. "He's got a good grip," Ruth observed from the doorway.
"Going to be a rancher like his father. Or a carpenter like his namesake," Maggie said softly.
Caleb looked at her.
"Namesake? I thought, if you agreed, we could call him Patrick. Patrick Charles Thornton."
For Patrick, who had died protecting his family. For Charles Whitfield, who had loved his daughter even when he was too weak to show it. That's perfect. Molly appeared in the doorway, her eyes huge.
"Can I see? Can I see the baby?"
Caleb knelt carefully, bringing Patrick to Molly's level. "This is your brother, Molly. Patrick." Molly studied the baby with the intensity she gave everything. Then her face broke into the biggest smile Caleb had ever seen.
"Hi, Patrick. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything."
The baby made a small sound, almost like agreement. That night, after everyone had finally gone to sleep, Caleb sat in the rocking chair by the fire, holding his son. Maggie dozed in the bed, exhausted but peaceful.
Molly had fallen asleep on the floor, refusing to be too far from the baby.
Caleb looked at his family, his wife, his daughter, his son, and thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Alone. Empty. Convinced he'd used up all his chances at happiness. That man wouldn't recognize his life now. Wouldn't believe it was possible. But that man hadn't heard a child scream across the frozen plains. Hadn't made the choice to stop and help when he could have just kept riding. Hadn't learned that love wasn't a bucket that ran out, but a well that grew deeper the more you drew from it. Patrick stirred in his arms, and Caleb held him closer. "I'm going to tell you a story," he whispered, "about the day I found your mama and your sister. It was the coldest winter in years, and I was just riding through, minding my own business. Then I heard a scream. The fire crackled. The wind whispered outside. And Caleb Thornton, who had spent 9 years running from life, finally sat still and let it find him. 2 years later, Caleb stood on the porch of their new house, a proper house with real floors and multiple rooms, and watched his family in the yard. Maggie was chasing Patrick, who had learned to walk and was now terrorizing the chickens with toddler enthusiasm. Molly sat on the fence, calling out encouragement to her brother, while simultaneously teaching him the names of all the horses.
"Patrick, say smoke. Can you say smoke?" "Moke. Close enough."
Caleb's heart was so full it hurt. He thought about Clara and Rose. He still missed them, still visited their graves on the anniversary of their deaths. But the grief had transformed into something softer, a memory that ached, but no longer crippled. Maggie would understand. She still talked to Patrick's grave sometimes, still kept his doll in a special place, still told stories about him to the children.
Grief and joy could exist together, she'd taught him. One didn't cancel out the other. A rider appeared on the ridge. Caleb's hand went to his hip instinctively, though he hadn't needed his gun in months. The rider came closer, and he recognized Sheriff Wade's familiar silhouette.
"Wade." Caleb walked out to meet him. "What brings you this far out?" Wade dismounted heavily. His face was grim. "News from back east. Thought you should hear it from me rather than through gossip." What news? Harriet Whitfield died last night. In her sleep, they say, though some folks figure it wasn't quite that peaceful. Caleb absorbed this. He looked back at Maggie, who had stopped chasing Patrick and was watching them with worried eyes. I'll tell her. Thought you might want to. Wade mounted up again. For what it's worth, I think she made her own hell long before she died. Some people just carry it around with them. Reckon so. After Wade left, Caleb walked over to Maggie. She read the news on his face before he spoke.
She's gone.
Yes. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Patrick tugged at her skirt, but she didn't respond.
I don't know how to feel,
she finally said. You don't have to know right now.
She was a monster. She destroyed lives. She murdered people I loved.
Maggie's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered.
And she was still my mother.
Both things can be true.
I know.
Maggie wiped her eyes.
I think I need to go to her grave. Someday. Not to forgive her, but to, I don't know, close the door.
When you're ready, we'll go together.
You'd do that? After everything she did?
I'd do anything for you, Maggie. Thought you knew that by now. She laughed, though it came out wet.
Stubborn man.
You're stubborn man. That evening, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Maggie sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day.
"What are you thinking?" Maggie asked.
About how different my life is now. About how one moment can change everything.
The moment you found us? The moment I decided to stop. Caleb took her hand. I could have kept riding. The storm was bad. I was tired. Nobody would have known. But you didn't. No. And every day, I'm grateful for that choice. Maggie leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think choices didn't matter, that fate just happened to us. But now I think we make our own fate, one decision at a time. That's a lot of philosophy for a rancher's wife. I contain multitudes. He laughed. God, he loved this woman. Loved her wit and her strength and the way she challenged him. Loved the life they'd built together from the wreckage of their separate losses. Caleb? I'm glad you stopped that day. I'm glad the storm drove you to that cabin. I'm glad for every terrible thing that led us to this moment, because without them, I wouldn't have you.
That's dark, Maggie. That's life. She sat up to look at him. We don't get to choose our circumstances. We only get to choose how we respond to them. You chose to save us. I chose to let you in. We chose each other. And we keep choosing. Every day. Caleb kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, the way he'd wanted to kiss her from almost the first moment they met. She melted into him, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the two of them and the Montana sunset and the life they'd built. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Molly's voice floated through the window.
Patrick, stop pulling my hair. Moke! Moke! He's not a horse, he's a baby,
Maggie laughed. I should probably intervene. Probably. But neither of them moved. They just sat there, listening to the sounds of their children, their home, their family. Caleb thought about the man he'd been before, the ghost who'd haunted an empty ranch, convinced he was better off alone.
That man had been wrong about everything. Solitude wasn't safety.
It was just a slower way to die. Connection was the risk worth taking. Love was the well that never ran dry. And family, real family, the kind you chose and built and fought for, was the only thing that made any of it worthwhile. Hey, Maggie? Thank you. For what? For letting me save you." She smiled, that brilliant smile that still made his heart flip every time. "Thank you for being worth saving." The sunset faded into darkness. The stars emerged, vast and eternal. And on a small ranch in Montana Territory, a man who'd thought his story was over discovered it was only beginning. He had a wife who challenged him, a daughter who amazed him, a son who was learning to say his name, a future that stretched out before him, full of possibility. He had something to protect, something to build, something to pass on. He had, after 9 years of emptiness, finally found what he'd been looking for.
Home. Not the place, but the people. Not the building, but the love that filled it. Not the land he owned, but the family he'd chosen and been chosen by. The man who'd ridden through a blizzard and heard a child scream had made a choice that day. A choice to stop, to help, to open his frozen heart to the possibility of pain, and therefore to the possibility of joy. It was the best choice he'd ever made. And on that porch, under those stars, with his family safe inside and his wife warm beside him, Caleb Thornton knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again, every single time. Because some things were worth the risk. Some things were worth everything. And love, real love, the kind that demanded everything and gave back more, was the most worthwhile thing of all. That was the truth he'd learned in the storm. That was the truth he would carry for the rest of his days. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.